Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the ETVT Podcast, where you're free to build your perception from an infinite world of possibilities. I'm your host, Elijah Vargas.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the ETVT Podcast, where we're all about perception. Super excited now because it is time for another book review. Yeah, like my riff. Anyway, let me take the tape off of this because I'm going to be letting somebody possibly borrow this book, but I'm sorry, possibly have this book, but at the moment I think borrow it, but you never know when you're letting people borrow books. So this review is going to be on the Mozart Effect. Let me come on, light. Gosh darn it. Get it closer to the camera for you. Oh, this is terrible. I'm struggling here. All right, tell you what. There we go. Something like that. All right, bye. Don Campbell. So, what made me get this book? Well, in a very, very, very early podcast, actually, I think I'm gonna look at that. Look at me. In a very early podcast, me and Henley had talked about um, like sleep sounds, right? And there are certain sounds that we would each individually find more comfortable to help us sleep and whatnot. Because we were talking about how our sleep has changed, since we joined the military and went through all the hibbly hooplas and all that good stuff. Well, I looked at a peer-reviewed paper on alpha, beta, gamma, the different waves of sounds and how they affect the brain. And there are wonderful writings on studies that have looked at this. So in light of that, I got this book because I found out that there's a term for it, which is the Mozart Effect. And somewhere in this book, it says that it's called the Mozart Effect because I believe Mozart music connects people more with like their adolescence days, makes people feel a similar feeling. Their brains would react in a way as they would like with their mother. And so I highlighted a few pages to get some points, and then we'll get to like, my thoughts on it. But oh wait, actually, I think organize. Well, here's one description. Uh, so here there is a study. Well, first let's get into what it is. I'm gonna get into that. I am sure that I have highlighted actual parts. Just so many. So here's my first highlight. We suspect that complex music facilitates certain complex neuronal patterns involved in high brain activities like math and chess. By contrast, simple and repetitive music could have the opposite effect. All right, so let me take that point, right? Right now you get the gist of it. Sounds affect our brains. Well, growing up, I was a huge fan of rap. Big Pun, Biz Markie, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Biggie Smalls. Never really got into Tupac much. Hey, don't hate me. Don't hate me. I don't want to hear it. But I was really big into like original rap, right? And I liked the narrative. I liked the beats, Dougie Fresh, Fat Joe, Terror Squad. Like that was my thing. And one of my biggest ones when I was in middle school was Eminem. And when I say I used to listen to rap religiously, I mean religiously. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, before I even moved to the South, like before I was 3, my mom listened to a lot of DMX, who I was also a huge fan of. Um, but I think Rough Riders Anthem was the one where you would hear gunshots and go, "Talk is cheap, mother." So, my mom said that I was running around at 2 saying that, and she would say, "Cheers." Say, that's just the environment I grew up in. And I had mentioned on a couple of occasions, I was very angry growing up. I got in a lot of fights, and there were points where I was very aggressive. I just don't know how to explain it. Like there was a complete different, it's like emotional state that I live in now than I did even just a few years ago. Recently that I kind of start getting out of it. But when you look at the difference between how music is made now as opposed to then, and what's crazy to me, and actually there is a section in here in rap, is I love rap for what rap was made to be. But now that everything is like kind of engineered in an electric studio, there's not a lot of like street bands and stuff like that. What's funny is it's made in a very technologically advanced way. But again, how our brains are interpreting it is very simple. The patterns are simple. The beats are simple. They're very repetitive. And you almost kind of see like it brainwashes people. People talk a lot more simple. Like their vocabulary declines. People start to view life in a very simple way. Like I hate, and it's so sad to me to see the people that don't face up to a lot of life's challenges because they get locked into that type of living. And you're going to hear that in a previous podcast that I have. Um, there were a lot of things that I knew wasn't good for me, a lot of decisions I didn't make, a lot of things I decided not to get involved in because I saw enough of it to know that it wasn't good. But, you know, sounds have a big impact on how our brains operate, and how our brains operate have a big impact on culture. And in all honesty, I don't think we consider how much what we're feeding ourselves, sound wise, music wise, impacts who we are. As a matter of fact, and I think I will add that snippet here, but there was, if you don't believe me, I have like a 30 or minute snippet of Ice Cube, an interview that was shared where he said that the same companies that own the labels own the prisons. And DJ Reek explained to me how, it's kind of like a money cycle. All these labels have a partnership and own the music industry in some way. It's all it is it's business.
Let's take it. Same people who own the labels own the prisons. So,
Wow.
literally the same people? Literally the same people who own the labels own private prisons. So, it seems really kind of suspicious, if you want to say that word, that, the records that come out are really geared to push people towards that prison industry.
But they didn't make you write those lyrics.
It's not about making somebody write the lyrics. It's about being there as guardrails to make sure certain songs make it through and certain songs don't.
Wow.
Certain flavors are exposed on the record. Some records are made by committee. Meaning record company guys sit around and tell the artists, this is hot, say that, do this. We're going to have this guy write the lyrics. We're going to have that. So.
But Ice Cube was explaining how the people making the decisions on what's out there is not the artist, but it's the boards, right? And we'll get into that. But you don't believe me? Ice Cube already said it. Anyway, back to the more technical parts of this. The power of music may be even more dramatic than this research indicates. Although the Irvine team brought the Mozart effect to the attention of the public, it is undoubtedly the research of, actually, here's the point, Alfred Tomatis, which is where a lot of the studies of this book are. But I want to get to the juices. Let's get into the juices. Here we go. The possible most important contribution was to recognize that the fetus hears sound in the womb. And this was something known as the sonic rebirth, which a study started on this in early 30s, the early 1950s. The fetus hears an entire range of predominantly low-frequency sounds, Tomatis explains in The Conscious Ear, which is an autobiography. And what the rest of this book goes on is, oh, here we go. Usually the music of Mozart is a substitute for an absent parent. That's what I was talking about earlier. Okay, I'm glad I marked that. It's kind of hard to go through all these markings. Anywho, I have so many notes and so many things, but the point is this, guys. There is a psychological, neurological impact. And one of my favorite parts was more towards like the ending parts of this book, where, what page is this? I'll just go through the chapters for you. The Healing Breeze of Sound, Sound Beginnings, Sound Listening, Chapter 2, Sound Healing, sound voice, sound medicine. This one is the one I wanted to talk about because a lot of people don't recognize, and this is not something that we really talk about, how sound isn't just used for only the psychological part. Sound has, when our brain goes through certain chemical reactions and stuff, there are physical reactions. You've heard of the placebo effect. You've heard of, here's a good example, orgasms, right? Fascinating. But the orgasm is, it's a chemical reaction, right? But our body feels certain ways, and we end up making so many decisions chasing that feeling, right? Good and bad ones. But I think that people who don't learn how to necessarily control it are the ones that are, going to the clubs and to be in the environment where they think it's cool to manipulate and it's cool to lie, where it's, oh, as long as I hit, that's all that matters. But, there are long-term effects of uncontrolled actions. Let's be honest. And a lot of people would use the excuse, oh, that's just being a man. No, I think being a man is admitting that it's something that's there. It's something that is a part of us, absolutely. But you can't let it control your life, like with any type of emotion or feeling. So, anywho, we're no strangers to knowing that chemical reactions affect how we feel, how we think, whatever. But a lot of us are strangers to understanding how music, a combination of sounds, and music alone, music theory within itself is extremely complex. But, you, or at least I, never really thought much about, let me take these off. I think there's a bad glare. Never thought much about how these are things that have been going on for centuries. Centuries. Hundreds and thousands of centuries. And that's just because this book has a whole chapter where they talk about different tribes that would have different, whether it was spiritual, whether it was legitimately used for medicine. There were tribes that would use music as a way of physically healing parts of bodies, and there's stories that seem like almost miracles. Just buy the book. Believe me, just buy the book. And if you don't want to read the whole thing, read specific chapters that appeal to you. But originally, I always thought that just listening to, I don't know, certain sounds would help with sleep, or, would help with focus, whatever. Maybe it could just be a placebo effect, but you never consider how this is a study that has actually been in place since the beginning of our written history. We just don't focus on it so much, but there are people who have recognized the power of that and have weaponized it. Here's another great example. There was a project that the CIA had, and it was called the Gateway Tapes. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Gateway Tapes, but I'm gonna share it with you right now. And my whole point of making this episode is not only for the book review, but also because this is a podcast on perception, and I need you guys to understand that the way that we perceive things in normal average society is not even a small fraction of the small fraction of the way that things actually are. And what's so fascinating to me about these findings and these studies and these ideas and realities, because we may not know how it works 100%, but the 100% fact is that sounds do affect us, whether it could be the sound of the pump that's on my plants, the sound of the wind coming through a certain width of a crack in the breeze, the sound of my fan, my ceiling fan. It's there. So I wanted to share this because these are things that this book really opens my mind up to, and it makes me a little more careful about, or more conscious, I should say, about what I try to feed my brain on a daily basis. And what's funny is, again, for a lot of people that don't care, or here's another good example, is we live in a society where the discomfort of learning heavily impacts people's lives. A lot of people don't want to learn. A lot of people don't want to learn outside of work. A lot of people already hate work so much because they have to learn at work. So they say, when I'm not at work, that's it. Like, I'm here to enjoy my life. But then I ask the question, like, what is life, right? Well, life is learning. We weren't born to just drink alcohol and play video games. I'm sorry, but we weren't. We were born, we're adventurous creatures. We always have been, and we always will be. We may live in a society now more that has weaponized things such as sound and culture and Like look up the studies that were done on kids' brains just when making that was actually in The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Um, look up the studies on kids' brains that were done just by making Sesame Street. Like oh my goodness, it's phenomenal. But you wouldn't think that there were psychologists and neurologists and stuff that were helping with the production of how can we make television more appealing to children. Maybe they had the intention of wanting to learn, but what we've learned is that the effects of these things takes over society. You don't need weapons. You don't need laws. You don't need policies. Make them comfortable. Make them slaves to the sound and to the sights that are around them. And hold on a second. I'm no different. I love video games. There goes my Switch. I love video games. The amount of times where I have not read a book or something or gone for a walk because I'm like, man, I haven't played my video games in 2 or 3 days. I need to play some video games, and I'll play for like 5 hours. Yeah, I'm no exception. But it's amazing being aware of these things. So let's see. The gateway tapes are part of the gateway process, a training technique that uses sound frequencies to simulate the brain and achieve higher levels of consciousness. In September 2003, the CIA released 20-year-old documents related to the gateway process. The gateway affirmation is, I am more than my physical body because I am more than physical matter. I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world. They released now. If you haven't seen my episode on what was it? The Stanford prison experiment, and what was the other CIA thing I did with drugs? I forgot. The Stanford prison experiment, and gosh, I don't remember. But anyway, the CIA has been on this stuff for, and now it's bothering me, for years on end. And when it came down to, for example, the quest for mind control, it was a mind control experiment. MK Ultra was what it was on, MK Ultra. But anywho, there are people who have realized that the importance of utilizing the things in the world around us that we cannot see are not only amazing, fascinating, complex, and beautiful, but also very dangerous. So there were a lot of things and studies that we just don't know, and it bothers me that we go into offices all day and never have these conversations, and the only thing we're worried about learning is, oh, what's this cool policy or what's this cool whatever. Like, when you kind of start to branch out into the world of all these different things, you realize that a lot of things that we think are difficult in society are actually extremely easy, very easy. And I think it helps the intellectual capacity of a person, 100%. I had a conversation on the importance of having a balance of feminine and masculine energy, mother and father figures or mentors in your adolescence. And that's because, again, there are long-term effects to having the balance of these energies and these understandings and these lessons. Like, back to sound. I'm getting off topic here. But it's just no secret. And I wanted to bring awareness to this. This book definitely brought awareness to it for me. That things matter. Things matter. Things that we put in our mind are matter. And I want to put in, because I have so many folded pages and markings, but the issue is some of them that I've marked, unless I was to read like the rest of the page or something, they really wouldn't make much sense. But let's see, just drumming therapy, the power of African American music. Here we go. Traditional African music was dominated by the ring, a circle around which, actually, hold on. Before we get into that, we got Argentinian muse, lost musical treatments of the Middle East, which let me tell you something. Chinese music therapy, Indian healing music. I mean, these are all indigenous music today, like indigenous. If I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. I mean, you guys, let's do this. Oh, okay. So instead of like, especially because, I didn't write this book and I don't know what my limitations are for what I can and cannot share, the spiritual doo-wops, I would love to read the section at the bare minimum that they had on rap, because what he recognizes is that rap was a very important cultural thing And it was a beautiful form of putting poetry into music. Like that's what rap was. Like if you listen to Slick Rick, one of my favorite songs, I think everybody's favorite song by him, is Children's Story, because he's legitimately telling the story of a child, of a troubled child. And it doesn't even end well, which is a thing. Like it's all gloves off. It's not like a Hollywood whatever film where somehow everything works out perfectly. He's like, look, you do these things, you're going to jail, probably for life. And listen, if I'm not mistaken, I think the kid got shot, but I don't remember. But I know he got caught. Either way, the point is this: we have a lot of times we wonder, or maybe we don't. I don't think people actually wonder what it is that attracts them to the things that they're into, right? There's so many forms of music. Um, like my guys who are heavily into rap to this day and listen to nothing else are like, why do you listen to classical? Like it's you listen to this for fun? I'm like, yeah, just makes me feel good. Like what happened was when this certain part of awareness became part of who I was in my culture and I knew what I wanted, when I had a meaning to listen to the music, all of a sudden I realized that I can enjoy it. And that's ultimately what happened is as I grew out of the child parts of my childhood, um, and after so many years of going through, that and then trying to figure out what it means to be an adult to me. And for these last 2 years, it's been, God has put me in a position where I sit here and I'm like, okay, based off of everything that I've gotten in the past, who am I? Like now I have been answering to everything that has happened, that I've done, whatever. And because my experiences were so just like night and day, and like I was always on a hunger, a hunger for experience and adventure and whatever. But I also recognized that I had to pay my way. I can't just say, hey, mom, dad, can I go on this trip? No, it's like I got to figure out a way to. So how did I travel the world? Oh, I'm gonna join the army. How did I get my school paid for? Deploy, whatever. What am I going to study? Well, something that's like computer science because I am a fan of the unknown that's out there. And being that type of person, you kind of go into things with a different perspective, whatever you do, and you grow, like you sprout a certain way, different way, whatever, numerous ways. So as I've gone through these experiences in life, uh, my what I listen to, what I want to eat, how I feel about like it changed what's comfortable to me. Sometimes I don't even really know what's comfortable to me, um, because I get a comfort and discomfort from so many different types of environments because I've been a part of so many different types of environments. I don't really feel like I belong in a lot of places anymore, because I knew enough to know that I didn't want to be a part of almost like I don't like glorifying criminalized acts. I don't. I've had family get killed because of that. I've had family get arrested for life because of that. I've had a lot of family get killed because of that, and even like recently, and it's sad. But I'm like, when I hear people try to talk about, oh, you know, I hate to say it, but there's people who have never had those experiences who are like who try to talk like hood and wanna talk like whatever, and I'm like, you guys do realize that there's nothing good about it, like, so I don't feel like I belong there, and a lot of people, and also I'm not like a, I don't know, William Fancy son. Like, do I like wearing suits? Yeah, I'm going through a phase right now where I have learned about the parts of the suits, like the gorge line, the lapel. I love double vent. I don't like single vent cuts, so I'm kind of a fan of like the British style. And believe it or not, I'm not a fan of the Japanese style as much. But anyway, but I'm not so fancy to where I kind of fit in with like the high class, like I don't belong with the kids whose dads were bankers and politicians and lawyers and doctors. Like I don't, so I'm just kind of here, kind of had the experience here, had more experience there, but then this side is like, you know nothing about us, and all right, whatever. This side's like, well, you don't belong here, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just so I pick up books like this, and okay, my point of actually saying all that, and this shouldn't be on the ground. My point of saying all that was that as I've gone through these experiences, even leading up to now, my taste and how I feel and interpret a lot of things has changed. I went from listening to nothing but rap to listening to mostly classical to now just I listen to a lot of indie music now because I like narrative. I like story. I used to listen to music because I wanted to be the person that the music was describing. But now I listen to music because I want ideas. I want something that will serve as a portal to looking into different parts of the world now. And that's where I think we have also lost sight, is because we're talking about music, that glorifies taking drugs and raping and stealing people's girls and being like the best number one. I think that there's a falsified idea of also doing everything alone, and there's not a single person that's successful that has done anything alone. That is a very egotistical and dangerous way to think, and you should not raise people to think that way because we as humans need to work as a unit, and you're not going to accomplish anything phenomenal just by yourself. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened at all. Even Jesus needed help from his father God. So like, come on. Anywho, um, there's a lot of ideas that are in the modern rap that I just don't agree with, and it's doing is a lot of people who have had very cushiony, very great childhoods and lives, who made who didn't have it hard, who had their school paid for, who always had their home, who always had a foundation, like who had anything that they needed when they needed, who never had to worry about having to be the sole person that would, like, if they mess up, they have something to go back to. They have a foundation. Not a lot of people have it. So people like that are listening to music and always have been, and they're like, well, I'm part of this culture simply because of the color of my skin. So therefore, anybody who doesn't act like me cannot be a part of it. And like, no, it's funny because, a lot of people haven't seen as many of those repercussions, but want to act like they understand and they know. And, they kind of get away with it because it's part of the culture. But why is that part of the culture now? Well, it's because of what people are fed, right? Same thing with school. We are so off track off of what truly happened throughout history. And in a way, it's caused a lot of victimization and a lot of, one-sidedness to where people don't understand how bad things actually were around other parts of the world. Like, I'm sorry, but, Africa sold not us, that would have been a terrible thing to say, but sold whoever, the Spaniards, white man, whatever it was, that was the great slave trade. Like, slavery was already happening. And the worst part is the slaves were sold for mere nothing. And it's like, we need to focus. And then I'm reading a book now called The King of Paris, where you talk about Alexandre Dumas. I don't necessarily know how to pronounce his name, but he was like one of the most renowned writers in Paris. And there's a section where somebody from America named Williams, I believe, comes to him and is like, will you come to America and help because the slavery issues, blah, blah. And Dumas laughs at him and he's like, that's the culture that you guys decided to live in. He's like, why would I force myself to go somewhere where I know I'm not going to be appreciated? And it's just when you go for this knowledge and you learn about these things and how so many things affect us. Like at the time, Dumas was an artist. Dumas felt that way because there's a world that he's dove into that we haven't really normalized understanding, right? So we usually normalize things like war and work and I don't know, whatever the hell people are. But what you feed your brain is important. And what you feed your brain down to something as minimal, or what you think is as minimal as music, as art, or specifically music in the case of this book, really impacts the person that you are. And it's also not an overnight shift, right? It is a slow process that happens over time. So, it to me, it's kind of hard to take the flavor out of a chicken that's been seasoned overnight, right? Or that's been sauteed overnight, or like beef or whatever. It's it's tough. But from reading this book, I will say that this book permanently changed my perception on life in a very, very deep way. It's made me grow a lot more appreciative for a lot of things. Because the honest to God truth is, and if you listen to my last episode on the podcast, I explained how I already appreciated so many different cultures. But what bothers me is, as somebody who appreciates a lot of cultures, there are a lot of people who have the culture in their blood, but haven't been raised in the culture, who will disband me more or will knock me more because I'm not, sorry, my mustache is itchy, because I'm not born as part of that culture, or connected in some way to that part of the culture. But I've met people who have already been part of the culture who have appreciated me so much more and that I've learned so much from. And as a person who appreciates different cultures and loves like the different types of, I don't know what you would call it. I mean, there's a lot of things. There's art, there's music, there's sound, medicine, practices, spiritual ideas. It bothers me when a lot of people want to hate other people or deny other people, just because I don't know. I think it's a victimized mindset, but it's also not their fault because it's the way that they were raised to think. In a place like America, which is such a melting pot, a lot of us think we know worlds and things that we've actually never seen. So it's just amazing. It's amazing to me that good people are knocked because of how they look, because of how they act. But at the end of the day, we've all been raised in the same country. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I have never met a native that isn't proud to share and talk about and understand, help people understand their art. Like, typically I found that natives that don't have a specific reason to hate or target a specific group of people are always proud and honored to share parts of their prideful upbringings and roots in tribes. And I would love to get back into an environment where that was a normalized thing. Like, basic training is hard because that's typically where a bunch of people are brought from different places, no matter what. It almost feels random, and you're just thrown into like one location. I don't think there's a lot of things that are really like that. But like, it would be cool to have a job where that's kind of how it is. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it wouldn't make much sense in practice, but that's just me trying to speak off of my desire to truly like know and see or just experience all the different things that impact different parts of this world, because our reality that we think we're living in is not reality. It's not reality for probably billions of people. There's 7 billion people in the world. We only have what, almost 400 million. Yeah, billions of people in this world. Like, what we think we feel, even about what we think we know, like, it's amazing to me and it's beautiful, but Americans don't always see it that way. And I think that's what bothers me. Like, when I read this book and I read about all of the historical references and the historical practices and different tribes and different groups and different cultures and different countries, or the King of France or the tipping point, um like, we learn about American racism because America was a very racist country. And is it still racist? Yes, there are still numerous parts of this country that are racist, very much so. But the fact that it was even worse is true. And it was very normalized, like almost like it wasn't as hidden as it is now. And sometimes it's not so hidden, but whatever. That's another topic for another day. But the point is, even then, when we were at the peak of all that, the reality for other people of African descent was the complete opposite, like Alexandre Dumas. But the only reason why I know about him is because I went into an old library, picked up a book, and they let me have it for free because like nobody reads it. And I'm like, who is this guy? I don't understand what's going on. What is this? And I'm like, holy crap. Ding, ding. Wait a minute. The reality for people of this descent in this part of the world at this time is the complete opposite of the reality for the people in this country at this time. So then it makes me beg the question, what is it truly about? Is it about the music that you were raised listening to? Is it about the culture that you were around? Is it about the information that your teachers were giving you? Is it about somebody who said something to you years ago that was not good? Maybe it's a combination of all of those things. But when you really unpack that, it just makes you realize that we are living off of a lot of things that we don't understand, that we don't know, or in my opinion, ugh, I hate to say it this way because some people may take it the wrong way, but that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really matter. Because when you look at the harsh reality for different people, or just the harsh reality in general, like when I went overseas and I saw the starving people, the people who um like I had a woman whose child was I'm pretty sure dead, like sitting there with these really holy eyes and bugs flying all over him. And she grabs my shoulder and she's like, please, she was trying to sell things, like rocks or whatever. It's like, I take card, I take whatever. And I'm just like panicking. But things like that, when I saw how people like that live, how women have to wear these thick black turbans and are sold for prostitution or told who to marry, whatever, and these very terrible areas in the Middle East that you don't really hear about much on the news or people don't even consider or have heard about and are just like, oh, whatever, that's not me, so I don't care. But that's a really real thing for thousands of people. Um, Kids who don't even know, probably don't even know that a phone exists. Like it's ridiculous. When I saw that, for example, my appreciation for this country became so much more. And there were people that started hating me for that. Like, how dare you appreciate a country like this? And I'm like, do you know what's going on over there? Do you understand like the horrific nature for a lot of people? Like the fact that in a country like that, things like rape are normal? Like, come on. So it started to make me realize what opportunities we really have here. So when I come back home to a place like this, I'm like, I can read more books. I can ask more questions. I can try to understand more things. I do not want to take advantage of the opportunity that is set in front of me. But not a lot of people see it that way. So when you look at things like the Mozart effect, and I think there are a lot of effects that go just outside of sound, but this will lay a great basis for how things that you really don't understand on even a very simple level permanently impact the lives of millions of people and culture. Um, when you start to realize things like that, it changes your life. And to the point that I was making and why I said all this is because in a way, I'm not saying that I've grown cold, but there's a lot of things that didn't really matter to me. Like a lot of cultures, people try to spew on me and I'm like, I don't care. Like I'm not going to hate a group of people because you want me to. Office culture is another big one that I talk about a lot. I'm not going to limit myself to just feeling and thinking and seeing things this way because what you guys don't understand is that this is also hindering us from the true level of improvement that we can actually experience as a people, and it enslaves people's minds. So I don't always want to operate in just the ways that you know people who have lived the last 20 years in office culture try to tell us to. Like there are things out there, there are things that we can utilize, conversations that can be had, ways that we can operate that are not only better but more efficient. So, and I think that's also another good argument with like telework, whatever. But some things that apply here do not necessarily apply there. So again, the complexity of things in life, it's amazing. But the reason why all this still ties into the book review is because, again, these are all thoughts that are kind of the root from what I learned here. Because when you really start to realize the information that's already out there, the things that have happened throughout history, just with sound alone, when you're done reading a book like this, then you're like, okay, what more? What's next? You want to try to have deeper understandings of things that are in here. Like I think there's a part of this book that I didn't necessarily understand, where it talks about, oh, look at Gregorian monks, the Tibetans. I mean, gosh, you just flip through the pages and the things that you find, the power of the Gregorian chant. You guys, the power of sound in human nature is beyond. I wish that things like this were talked about in school. There was a page somewhere. I'm kind of remembering now. It went into like decimals and hertz and all this crazy stuff, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. So I have to look it up more and kind of try to find examples. And there are deeper sounds, and there are sounds that may not be able to be heard by some people, but heard by others. Wavelengths that are, or hertz lengths that are like this, or ones that are like this, and they affect our brains different ways. And you're like, wow. So, and again, I think we kind of normalize thinking of sound as just music, but that's not the case. Is everything has a sound, like this knocking. on the table, my clapping. Actually, part of that book talks about how a clap was almost like a big slap in the face, because clapping is actually not like a good sound for you to take in. And there's a part in the book about it. He explains it better than I do, Mr. Campbell. But he was explaining how you will have like these beautiful orchestrated sounds or whatever, and all of a sudden people come and bow, 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 bow. And I'm like, I never thought about it like that. So I actually, he's like, it's almost like an insult to the art. And I'm like, I mean, it makes sense. That's a good argument because you have a lot of backing for feeling that way. Now, culturally, that does not make sense. So there are people that be offended if you don't clap. But when you understand this for what it is, on the natural basis of its existence, you're like, huh, that's something to think about. But again, we don't. So the Mozart Effect by Don Campbell, I would highly recommend. And because of the lighting here, I will put it in the thumbnail. And I will also put in the link to buy this book. And you guys can. Now, I really enjoyed this conversation. This was a very, very open one. In a way random, but it ties to the same concept of perception and learning and understanding, and how so many things that we're not aware of affect our lives, our culture, and how we act. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the point of this book review. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you care to buy this book. And yeah, my emails are open. My social media is open. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, ETVT out.